That measly salary is more than enough for you, my mother-in-law sneered. It was my 20th year working at the company run by my in-laws, and the envelope she handed me contained a pitiful 10-cent paycheck. My backstabbing mother-in-law and my good-for-nothing husband had run the company into the ground ever since my father-in-law, the former president, passed away and they took over. If you don't like that salary, then get a divorce, my husband said with a smug look on his face. I decided to leave the house, just as he wanted. Little did they know that my actions would end up backing them into a corner. You see, they were oblivious to one crucial fact. I married David when I was 23, after meeting him through a mutual acquaintance. From the moment we met, I was captivated by his gentle demeanor and warm gaze. David was a smooth talker who always seemed to know just what to say to make me feel better. I truly believed we'd have a bright and peaceful life together. However, about 6 months after we started living together, a sudden turn of events shook our daily lives. From that day on, the happy future I had envisioned began to warp and eventually crumbled. Nancy, would you consider working at our company? It all started when David approached me with a solemn look on his face. His family ran a nursing home, and they were short-staffed. I think Dad would be thrilled if you came to work for us. What do you say? As David looked up at me timidly, I found myself in a quandary. If it had been a facility I didn't know, I might have refused. But I felt indebted to my in-laws. You see, my father, who had passed away a few years earlier, had been cared for at the nursing home run by my father-in-law. It was a complete coincidence that I ended up marrying David, the owner's son, and I was quite surprised when I found out. When we went to announce our marriage, my father-in-law remembered me and kindly said, "Your father was a wonderful man." As someone who adored her father, those words meant the world to me. So when I learned that this kind-hearted man was in trouble, I felt compelled to help however I could. After all the kindness you showed my father, I'd be more than happy to help out at the facility if you'll have me, I offered. Really? That's a huge help. Thank you so much. We'll be working at the same place, so don't hesitate to ask if you need anything, David replied, practically jumping for joy. At the time, I was genuinely excited about the prospect of being useful at the facility and repaying the kindness shown to my father. However, that career move would end up changing my life dramatically. The first thing that struck me as odd at my new workplace was my mother-in-law's attitude. She worked as a clerk at the facility. One day during break time, she barged in and demanded, "Nancy, compile these documents later." When I explained that I was a floor staff member and not familiar with clerical work, she snapped, "What's that? Are you talking back to me? Don't get uppity with me, you're just a daughter-in-law. Stop yapping and get to work." My mother-in-law slammed the papers down and stormed out of the break room. Until then, I hadn't had much interaction with her, so I was unaware of her true feelings. It seemed she didn't think very highly of me, probably feeling like I had stolen her son away. She would give me tasks that weren't my responsibility, issue false instructions on the floor, and badmouth me behind my back. Despite the fact that they had been desperate for help, she seemed intent on sabotaging my work at every turn. Fortunately, it turned out that my mother-in-law had always been that way, so the other staff members understood my situation without me having to explain. However, the fact remained that I was causing trouble at work by following her false instructions, and I began to feel more and more out of place. To make matters worse, "Hey, Mom told me you're completely useless at work," my husband confronted me one day. "That's not true. I'm doing my best," I protested. "Well, if you can't do your job properly, at least do the housework decently," he retorted. Even my husband had started berating me. It seemed my mother-in-law had been poisoning his mind against me as well. As a result, he stopped listening to my side of the story and began treating me with contempt. He even started dumping all the household chores on me, which we used to share. Why does he only believe what his mother says? I wondered sadly. I had quit my previous job and transferred to this one to help out my struggling in-laws. Even though I was still getting used to the work, I thought I had been trying my best every day. So why was I being treated like the bad guy? I couldn't help but feel disappointed. If only I hadn't changed jobs, maybe my relationship with my husband would have remained good. However, there was a big reason why I couldn't quit this facility: my father-in-law. "You're giving Nancy far too much work," he would scold them. "But she's young, she can handle it," my mother-in-law would protest. "That's beside the point. David, don't just stand there, protect her properly," he'd command. "All right, I got it," David would mumble. Even after I became an employee, my father-in-law always looked out for me. Whenever he saw them treating me poorly, he would reprimand both my mother-in-law and my husband. Given his strict personality, neither of them dared to talk back to him. "Nancy, you're a big help. Thank you for everything," he would always say whenever we crossed paths. As time went on, I found myself not only indebted to him as my father's benefactor but also personally saved by his kindness. That's why I wanted to protect the nursing home he was so passionate about running. As long as my father-in-law was around, I wanted to support this facility to the best of my ability. With that resolve in my heart, I endured my mother-in-law's harassment and my husband's arrogant attitude, and before I knew it, I had been working there for 20 years. But one day, that life came to an abrupt end. Oh no! I received a call from my husband and rushed to the hospital, only to find my father-in-law lying on a bed with a white cloth over his face. Tragically, he had passed away from a sudden heart attack. The loss was so sudden that I fell into a depression for a while. However, I never thought I'd become the president this soon. Now you can run the facility however you like. It seems they had found my father-in-law's constant supervision annoying. Shockingly, my husband and mother-in-law seemed more excited about being able to run the company freely than they were sad about the loss. As soon as David became the president, even my mother-in-law, who had been on the verge of retirement, started wielding power. "This guy talked back to me the other day. Can we fire him?" "Why not? We can just make Nancy do his work." They started firing employees they didn't like, treating suppliers rudely, and the workplace that had once been so pleasant under my father-in-law's leadership turned into complete chaos. Some people even quit voluntarily, unable to bear the situation. By that time, my relationship with David had deteriorated to the point where we barely spoke at home. If I tried to voice my opinion about management policies, he would fly into a rage and storm out of the house. This was a place my father-in-law had poured his heart and soul into building, and at this rate, the very existence of this precious facility was in jeopardy. I agonized daily over how to prevent that from happening. However, an incident 2 weeks after my father-in-law's passing would drastically change my perspective. "Nancy, clean up the president's office, will you? That room belongs to David now, so get on with it," my mother-in-law ordered. As I was tidying up the room my father-in-law had used, I discovered a shelf lined with handwritten notebooks. Curious about their contents, I was boxing them up when I accidentally dropped one on the floor. As I hurriedly tried to pick it up, my eyes fell on the page it had opened to. "Is this father-in-law's diary?" Before I knew it, I was engrossed in reading the notebook. "If it comes down to leaving the management to my son or letting this facility close down, I'd prefer the latter. I worry about Nancy and whether she's suffering. I want her to be happy." There, in my father-in-law's handwriting, were his innermost thoughts. It seemed that in his final days, he wasn't concerned about preserving the facility, but rather about my happiness. I found myself clutching the notebook, tears streaming down my face. Until then, I had been working for my father-in-law's sake, to protect the facility that had cared for my father. But if he himself didn't wish for the facility to continue, that changed everything. Perhaps I had already repaid my debt of gratitude. After reading it all, my resolve to keep working while enduring unreasonable treatment vanished, and a new idea took its place. Then, as if guided by my father-in-law's spirit, the moment of decision arrived soon after. "Here's your salary for this month. That should be plenty for you," my mother-in-law said one payday, handing me an unusually light envelope. The salary was usually deposited directly into my account, so this was odd. My husband stood next to her with an unpleasant smirk on his face, giving me a bad feeling. I took out the contents, and to my shock, a single 10-cent coin fell out. "What is this?" "It's exactly what it looks like. If you don't like that salary, then get a divorce," they cackled, clearly amused by my confusion, and threw those triumphant words at me. I let out a deep sigh and observed their smug expressions. It seemed they wouldn't be satisfied unless they thoroughly humiliated me, but their short-sightedness was glaringly obvious. At that moment, they were unaware of a crucial fact. "I understand. Then let's get a divorce," I declared, finally making my decision. Having lost my reason for working there and fed up with my mother-in-law and David, I quit the company, divorced my husband, and decided to return to my family home. All while harboring a bold plan that would turn the tables on them. A week later, as I was leisurely preparing documents to submit to my new workplace at my parents' house, the doorbell suddenly rang. I peeked at the monitor and saw my mother-in-law and ex-husband standing there with panicked looks on their faces. "Nancy, I know you're in there. Come out this instant. We're in a dire situation here." Seeing them flustered and ranting at my front door, I couldn't help but smile. I hadn't left my in-laws' nursing home without a plan. I had anticipated that my mother-in-law and ex-husband would find themselves in trouble. "Why are you so upset? We're strangers now, aren't we?" I opened the door, feigning innocence, and they immediately latched onto me, their faces pale with fear. "This morning, people from the city office came and said we couldn't operate the facility anymore," my mother-in-law blurted out. "They said they'd be conducting a detailed investigation later." "What's going on? Did you do something?" David demanded. Seeing them cornered, I let out a small sigh. My mother-in-law, who had always disliked me, and David, who had come to see me as nothing more than a servant, to them, I was probably just a convenient employee. But it was precisely because this convenient cog in their machine had left that they were now in such dire straits. "I reported you to the city office. After all, your facility was required to have a nurse on staff," I explained. Their eyes widened at my words. "You see, I actually hold a nursing license, and before transferring to their facility, I had worked at a fairly large hospital. While standards vary depending on the type of care facility, the one my father-in-law had run required at least one nurse on staff at all times. Previously, there had been several nurses besides me, working in shifts. But due to my husband and mother-in-law's tyrannical behavior, eventually, I was the only one left. They can't overlook a facility that's in violation of regulations. I was worried about the residents. Plus, I found out about the fraud you've been committing." As I glared at them, my mother-in-law, who had been in charge of accounting, tensed up, clearly aware of what I was referring to. After reading my father-in-law's diary, I had secretly investigated the facility's operations. I thought it would be better to force the facility to shut down before it deteriorated further, believing that my father-in-law in heaven would approve. As a result, I discovered that my mother-in-law had been submitting paperwork for care services that were never actually provided, fraudulently receiving care compensation. David, who had become president without proper study or preparation, relying entirely on his father's management, had been completely oblivious to this fact. Of course, I reported this to the city office as well. "A facility that doesn't meet nurse staffing requirements and commits fraud deserves to be shut down," I declared, my voice trembling with anger as I stared them down. Needless to say, compassion is crucial in the care industry. Despite that, they had mistreated an employee of 20 years and refused to pay a proper salary. I believe that a facility run by people who only cared about their own profits would be better off closed, for the sake of both the staff and the residents. No way. I finally became president, and now we're going bankrupt. We'll starve. You need to come back to our company right now. We'll pretend the divorce never happened." As soon as they understood the situation, they turned pale and started ranting, but it was already too late for me to return to the company. The wheels were already in motion. "I can't. I've already secured a new job. Besides, even if I did come back, you two would still be prosecuted," I said, crossing my arms confidently. Their eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean? Are you saying you're going to sue us? David sputtered. Not me. You haven't forgotten about all the people you arbitrarily fired, have you? I explained the situation to them too. I thought they had a right to know what was going on. I figured that having the facility shut down would cause trouble for my mother-in-law and David, but I didn't think that was punishment enough. So I contacted the people who had been bullied into quitting or unfairly fired, and told them what had happened. Furious with my mother-in-law and David, they quickly banded together and started making plans to sue them. I expect you'll be hearing from the court soon. Everyone was pretty angry, so there's no way you can wriggle out of this one, I informed them. Finally realizing the gravity of their situation, my ex-husband began bowing his head desperately, while my mother-in-law clung to my feet. I'm sorry, so please, tell them to drop the lawsuit right now. Look, let's get back together. I still love you, you know, David pleaded. That's right. If you come back now, you can be the president's wife again. And if you live with us, you can have an easy life, my mother-in-law added. I sighed in exasperation at their desperate pleas. Unfortunately, it seemed they didn't possess an ounce of the kindness my father-in-law had shown in his dedication to caregiving. Such cold-hearted people deserve to be punished. There's no way I'm coming back. From now on, do your best to atone for the punishment of ruining the facility, I said, shaking off their hands and closing the door, rejecting them outright. After that, their care facility, which had failed to meet various regulations, was forced to cease operations, and the company went bankrupt. Now unemployed, my mother-in-law and David are also being sued by the former employees and are reportedly in quite a state of mental distress. However, my revenge doesn't end there. The facility's security cameras had recorded their years of harassment towards me. Based on this evidence, I've decided to sue them for an additional $30,000 in damages, despite their current financial difficulties. I heard they're already about $200,000 in debt and on the verge of homelessness, but that's entirely their own doing. As for me, my 20 years of experience in caregiving was highly valued, and I successfully transferred to a new facility. I'm well respected at my new workplace and have been entrusted with important responsibilities. I have a great relationship with my colleagues and find fulfillment in my work every day. From now on, I intend to pursue my own happiness in this new environment.